So this is meant to be a quick review of the Sony A9 for wedding photography. I've now had this camera for about 2 weeks and I've shot 3 weddings with it, around about 10,000 plus images. So I have a rough idea of how I like the camera to be for weddings, but I still have a long ways to go. I haven't completed a full wedding season with it. So this is just my first impressions on my first few weddings. So my favorite thing about this camera, number one, as far as pro goes, is the silent shooting, the electronic shutter. It is amazing and is the main reason why I was really interested in this camera. I didn't buy this camera for size. I didn't buy this camera for weight. I didn't buy it for how many frames per second it can shoot. I bought it because it was quiet. And that's something that my Nikons haven't had. They're not even in their quiet modes, they're not really that quiet. The silent shutter on this, the electronic shutter, is amazing. First off, if you have a bride or a groom, or anyone, I guess they don't have to be a bride or groom. If you have someone who's really nervous because they're about to get married, being able to shoot through that moment and not have them have that extra layer of feeling like they're being papped is a huge benefit. Your clients might not even realize that that's an option, that's a benefit, but it's gonna make their experience better and make them feel a little bit more relaxed. I don't know what it's like where you live, but in the UK, vicars tend to be really restrictive. So I've been banished to backs of churches. I've been told that I can't take any photos during a ceremony. Being able to be completely silent during a church ceremony is a huge advantage. So even the Nikons that I've had previously, and even my second shooters that have had Canons, they're quiet in quiet mode, but they're not really that quiet. You could still hear them. This camera is completely quiet. So if I put it on now, I'll aim it towards you. Nothing. You don't hear anything. You do occasionally hear a little bit of autofocus noise if you're using autofocus on the lens, but that sound is very minimal and you only really hear it when you're focusing on a particular subject. Once it's in focus, you're not going to hear it again. So it's the reason why I bought this camera. So the downside to this camera, especially with the silent shooting mode, is you don't really have a frame of reference to how many images that you've shot. So you could accidentally overshoot a wedding and you don't even realize that you've done it. It just kind of creates a little bit more work in post-processing, but if you have more frames to pick from, that's not necessarily a bad thing. My second favorite thing about the A9 is the electronic viewfinder. If you're used to working with DSLRs, the electronic viewfinder is fantastic. It's another level up on a DSLR. And when I went back to shooting with my D4s after using this, the D4s just felt antiquated, like dinosaurs. Being able to use electronic viewfinder, especially one that's as sharp as this one, it's so much quicker to get exposure and get your settings right. You just don't even have to second guess it. You can just see it immediately and know that it's there. It just makes me feel a lot more comfortable knowing that I don't have to chimp to the back of my camera to make sure that I got my shot. I can just look through the viewfinder and I know that I have the exposure and everything's correct. It's a lot quicker and it's a lot more responsive than just using a DSLR. On the downside, something like the electronic viewfinder could be a little bit of a drain on battery life. Mirrorless cameras on average tend not to have great battery life as compared to DSLRs. However, the battery life on this has been fantastic. On average, I shoot probably 10 to 12 hours. I've only had to change the battery about after 6 hours, and then it kind of starts dying towards the end of the second half of the day. So I've only had about 1 battery change on average each wedding, which is actually really, really great for a mirrorless camera. The other benefit is the batteries charge really, really quick. So if you're having one of those weeks where you're just out the door running around doing things really quickly, being able to just pop a battery in charge and have it ready to go in about 30 minutes is just really nice. My D4 batteries takes, I haven't timed them, but it feels like hours in comparison. So even though the battery on this is smaller than it is on some of the bigger cameras like the Nikon D5, it's still really quick to charge and it still holds for a really long time. Another reason why I quite like this camera is I almost bought a D5 and I realized I wasn't really as excited about the D5 as I want it to be. And it is nicer that it is a smaller body than like the Canon and Nikon Pro bodies, the comparable Canon and Nikon Pro bodies. It is smaller. It still feels quite big. I have really tiny hands and it feels quite comfortable. It feels quite sturdy. I haven't really found it to be super uncomfortable to hold. Last weekend I shot 2 weddings in a row with it and I had a little bit of a finger bump from it. But that's kind of normal when I'm shooting with a new camera. I think that's like writing with a new pen. You kind of get a little bit of a a callous finger bump. But I didn't feel like my hands didn't hurt or anything like that. And I tend to shoot a lot over my head like that, and I didn't find the camera that hard to hold. I don't necessarily think that some of the bigger lenses that you can get, like this is the 35-1.4, some of the bigger ones will probably feel a little bit more out of balance. And I think that's where the battery grip comes in. I haven't bought the battery grip yet, but I think I might spring for it at some point just to kind of give my hands a little bit more to hold. If you have really big hands, you might find it to be really small. I have really tiny hands. I have like the smallest hands of anybody I know, and I find it to be really comfortable. So it might be comfortable for people with tiny hands, maybe not so great with people with big hands. However, one of the benefits about this being a little bit smaller of a camera is I shoot a lot in central London. I shoot a lot of engagement sessions and couple shoots in central London. I am constantly getting yelled at by security guards telling me to move on. And it's really, really, really nice to have something that maybe just looks a little bit more discreet. I'm probably still going to be yelled at by security guards, but if I can get yelled at a little bit less, that would probably be nice. As long as I don't look as obvious as I was with the larger Nikon bodies, that would be fantastic. I also want to use my cameras more for personal work, for doing stuff like street shooting and stuff like that. And I haven't taken my Nikons out for doing personal work or any street shooting just because they're too big. When I go on holiday, I never take my Nikons because they're just so large. They're not cameras that I want to carry around in my backpack when I'm traveling around. Whereas with this, maybe with a slightly smaller lens, would be something I would happily carry around and not feel like I was being weighed down by the camera. Another pro is the autofocus on this camera. The autofocus on this is fantastic. It's really quick. It's really snappy. I tried using the D750 for a weekend and I found the D750 to be frustratingly slow. I know the D750 is a very good camera, but I had just gotten so used to my D4s that the D750 just didn't feel as good in comparison. This is better than my D4s, and now it makes my D4s feel really slow. It's put me into a new camera bracket. So the autofocus is really quick. I can see exactly where it's hitting, and that's kind of another benefit of the electronic viewfinder, is being able to see those focus points and able to see that focus peaking. You don't have that same benefit on a typical DSLR viewfinder. So I found that to be super quick. But on the flip side, the thing I wish this camera had was the autofocus assist beam. Sony doesn't support autofocus assist. I don't use autofocus assist for just autofocus. I use it for aiming on the dance floor. And I wish Sony realized that stuff like that's actually really, really handy. Because when people are moving really quickly, let's say somebody goes and does a break dance, you can just go like that, see the autofocus assist beam, hit the person's face and just fire. You don't even have to look at the back of the camera. You know it's sharp. Not having that has kind of made me have to reevaluate how I do my dancing shots. It's a little bit, I'm sure it'll be fine at the end. It's not exactly what I'm used to and not exactly to what I had. So I've been finding for the last 3 weddings where I've used this camera, I've had to go back and use my Nikons for dancing because I knew what my Nikon system was doing. I haven't really established something yet for the Sony camera. I am also going to put some images in a blog post below. That way I can update the blog post and you can see what I've been doing. My final thing that I wanted to say that I love about Sony so far is the fact that they've addressed the service issues. Nikon and Canon have pro service support centers. Sony is setting up a service center in London. So what's nice is if I break a camera on a weekend, I can take it straight into the service center, get it fixed, and then bring it back in. I don't have to necessarily send it out, wait a few weeks, have it sent back. Being able to know that there's someone I can just take it to right away and get it fixed is an amazing feature. And I'm really glad that Sony's really addressing those needs. I feel like it's putting Sony on the same level as Canon and Nikon. The main downside on the flip side of that is the cost of switching from Nikon to Sony. It's not the cheapest move, and it hurts the bank account to do it. But I wish Nikon had made this camera so I don't have to switch, but they haven't. I know Nikon is planning on making a mirrorless camera at some point, but even if they've made a mirrorless camera at this point, Sony's had years of mirrorless camera technology ahead of Nikon. So why would I jump to Nikon over that? Like, Sony is probably a good 3 or 4 years ahead of them. So this is really the future of modern cameras. I think Sony figured out that the mirror isn't really necessary anymore. The autofocus assist beam, not really necessary anymore. It has focused incredibly quickly on dance floor stuff. I even had to use it with fireworks, lighting changing really quickly. It was great. It worked really, really well. So as far as this camera goes, I wish Nikon made it, and I'm sad Nikon hasn't. But I am very, very, very excited to continue using this camera all summer, and I cannot wait to do the update on it. Hopefully I still love it as much as I love it now, and I will speak to you soon.